Today is March 8th, 2021. My name is Enshi, and here with us is Mr. Huan Lei, and we're very grateful for your presence, Mr. Lei.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. To start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your arriving into Houston and settling here?
I'm part of the Vietnamese refugee immigration wave in the late 70s, early 80s. We immigrated in 1980 and got to Houston in 1982. So I grew up mostly in Houston, in the suburb of Houston, in a area called Alief. And I went on to University of Southern California, and then came back, or then went to law school in Austin. Then came and worked in East Texas for a while before settling back down in Houston in about 2003, I think. So 2002, 2003, I came back to Houston. So that's my history. And in terms of getting into the art scene, that's been more difficult because there's not like a manual out there to say how you're supposed to do it, and it's not. Um, there's not a lot of stuff online, especially back then, about local art scenes. So there's a lot of international, a lot of national, and a lot of stylistic things, but not local per se. So it's been just a lot of kind of a shotgun approach, which is go take a look at a lot of things and figure out what works for you and see if that works.
Yeah, that's super interesting to hear. And I guess can you take us a little bit back in that time and how the Houston art scene was back then?
So Houston's pretty, from what I can tell, has had a pretty good art scene for many years, and particularly like painting, sculptures, and well, particularly paintings and things like that. It seems to have a pretty good um, network of folks who are doing that kind of work. But it's not necessarily coherent. There's not like a style for Houston artists. So it's more that those artists happen to be in Houston, and they're involved more in a certain style or certain kind of art that is more national or even international. Does that make sense? And then the other thing I found is that most Houston artists that I know and come to like eventually go off somewhere else other than Houston, and they may or may not come back. And so it's been that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's super interesting to hear. And given you have been exploring the art scene in US, what would you find different comparing to the other big cities like Chicago, New York, LA, and so on?
Oh, I don't know if it's necessary. Uh, you know, I'll say, like, for example, if you're like talking about, like, say, pop surrealism or something like that, then there are pockets where it's really popular, like LA or New York for graffiti or something like that. But other than those kind of epicenters, I'm not sure I've encountered a lot of variance between one city and another per se, right? So for example, I lived in Austin for a while, and I can't say there's an Austin style, for example, right? I describe Austin probably the same way as Houston in terms of people happen to live there, uh, and that's where they're influenced. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
definitely. And have you been to MAFA, and would you uh, consider MAFA has any influence on the taste of Houston and Texas?
So every year I think about going to Marfa, and then I plan my trip and look at all the things they have, and then I wind up not going. So like last year was supposed to be the big push, but then COVID happened, and then so I didn't get to go anywhere. But so many people I know are going to Marfa regularly, or they've bought a house there, or some variation of that. And I think that it's a mix of art and culture, but because the art is embedded in the culture, right? The desert culture there, it seems. When I say desert culture, I don't mean desert culture. I just mean that the draw of Marfa is the location, partly, right, where it's out of the way from everything, and then the people come there. So that's I would say it's probably a huge influence for a lot of people I know. Some furniture dealers I know who collect art. They bought a place in Marfa a few years ago, and so they are continuously meeting people from around the country in Marfa, particularly in New York, and engaging with those people. And so they're bringing that back to Houston so New York art to Houston via Marfa, sort of thing.
Super cool. And thank you for sharing that. And I guess for you, would you say that your main hat is business and philanthropist? Can you share with us how you started this journey with art?
Oh, it's just personal, like, what do you like? So my first encounter where I thought, oh, art is something that I should, or I want to learn more about, was in the late 90s and early 2000s. Vietnamese art in Vietnam started to gain some international prominence. And there were a series of art galleries that were just starting to be known internationally in Vietnam. And so when I was there, I happened to be in a few of those galleries, and that's when I got really interested in art and things like that. Yeah.
That's wonderful to hear. And can you tell us about how you started your collection?
Collection's a strong word. It's just a series of random pieces, it seems like. But typically online, really. So there are only a few pieces I have where I didn't know that that was something that I wanted to buy or see in person until I actually saw it. So like this piece right here is a door from Morocco, right? And that's one of the few ones that when we stumbled upon it, then we got it. But most everything else I saw online and then tracked them down, right? So for example, what's a good example here? I have some Murakami prints, right? I didn't see Murakami in person first. I saw his work online first, and then started hunting it down. And so I saw a few pieces in Paris, and then I saw a few pieces, various other places before I picked up a few.
So, do you mostly source out for the arts that you like and directly contact the artist to from their studio?
Yes, so absolutely. I'd say more than half of the stuff I have is sort of in that category. Let's see here. You can see this piece here. This is a piece that was shown at the Asia Society, and the artist is Indian, and I found her first online through a website called Not Caught. I don't know if you've seen that website, but there was this website called Not Caught some years ago, and I saw her piece online, and she wasn't. She had studied art, but she wasn't really producing art, and she didn't have a gallery and things like that. So I contacted her directly and built a friendship with her. And so now she's, in galleries and things like that. But that was just reaching out to her directly and saying, I love your stuff, or, kind of see more kind of deal.
Wow, so you're doing your own discovery. That's amazing.
Well, yeah, it's nice to be able to engage with people and see what they're doing and how they're evolving.
That's wonderful. And I guess if you would consider yourself like kind of art enthusiast and like an explorer, what would your mission statement be if you?
Oh,
Yeah.
I have no idea. It seems to recently be get what you like and hunt for other stuff you like. But I'm not sure there's it's a pretty selfish endeavor if you really think about it, right? Because if you're trying to purchase these pieces, it's pretty selfish. You're putting it in your house for yourself, and you're kind of ignoring everybody else. So, so I'm not sure there's a public good from it
Yeah.
that deserves a mission. I mean,
Well, that definitely is a contribution by supporting the artist to begin with.
yeah.
And I'm also curious, what is your kind of most memorable encounter with an artist or a curator or an exhibition you visited?
So Marjorie, that piece I showed you is probably the most interesting. She wasn't producing pieces like that when I first encountered her, but it was most interesting because of how that evolved. So as I said, met her when she was just getting into that space before she got her first gallery, and got a few pieces, and then her art evolved, and it evolved towards something that Asia Society got interested in, which is how I got to know Bridget. Is actually through Manju's piece right here. Uh, so that's how that evolved. So I like that one because of the evolution of the relationship, where enjoyed her pieces very early, saw her career progress. Hopefully had a little hand in helping that, but that's probably the most interesting.
That's super cool. And I'm also wondering what are your favorite pieces in the collection?
Collection is a strong word, but
Japanese.
yeah, collection is a strong word. Um, uh, like it goes through cycles, right? Where you like certain things more than others. But the piece I just showed you, I definitely love. It's really fantastic. Every time I look at it, I go, oh wow, I'm so happy that's mine, right? So I love that one. The Murakami, like,
Oh,
I, yeah, I don't know why that one, but you know, there's so many Murakamis, but for whatever reason, the one that I have, uh, just really every now and then I look up and I go, oh wow. Then you walk towards it and you admire it, and then you forget about it for a few weeks or months, and then you go, oh wow. So that's a one that's interesting like that. Um, and then um, I don't know. I collect a lot of prints and a lot of like pop surrealism, and so it kind of rotates between pieces that I stumble across. So those are the big ones, I guess, that keep coming up over and over. Yeah.
yeah. That's great. And wondering, like, during the process of acquisition of these art objects, and do you kind of start um, kind of creating more meanings for yourself and for the work, or I mean, just during the process, does the work have more kind of impact on your life, um, like due to time?
Um, so are you asking, do the pieces have impact on me? And
Yeah. How do you interact with the artwork? In terms of the different stages in your life or the different mindset you're in? Do they kind of present
y-
to you in different ways?
yeah, definitely. This is where the selfishness is, right? Because if you get to the point where you say, I want to own that piece, you're basically saying, I want to exclude this from others having it, more often than, you know, because when you buy that piece, you're not going to look at it every second of every day, or maybe even every day, and ponder it fantastically, right? It's going to be something that occurs occasionally. And so you know, you're depriving the world essentially of that piece for somebody else. So there's, like I said, there's somewhat of a selfish journey that you have there. Um, and for me, what more and more of my purchases have evolved into is uh, trying to prevent regret, right? So many years ago, I was in India and we saw a wood relief that we thought was beautiful, and it came from a 500-year-old temple or whatever it was in India. And at the time, you could still export old relics from India. And we ultimately didn't buy it because it was inconvenient to buy and it cost a lot of money and all that. And it's been 20 plus years later, and we still talk about that piece, right? And so a lot of these purchases are about preventing regret at this point.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful kind of picture I have in my mind that you and your wife are kind of sharing those moments in with the arts. I'm also wondering, so for the acquisition decisions, do you make with your wife, uh, Mrs. Lakshmana? If
Yeah,
I, yeah,
that,
and she's very closely, I mean, connected to Rise, as I understood. Um,
yes, with the Baker Institute.
yeah, yeah, which is amazing. It all closes the circuit here. Um, so yeah, I'm just wondering, like, how in the um, like, how does your relationship kind of interact with the work that you acquire?
Oh, it's really good. We fortunately have similar tastes in art, so it's really good. And she, um, you feed off of other people in terms of energy and things like that. And so I think without her, it'd be hard. If my partner didn't like art, it'd be harder to make these. They're expensive decisions, and there's no practical value from them, right? And if you're really buying art, I don't think you're really thinking about the resale value. At least we don't, right? And so you're just kind of throwing money into the wind, and you're hoping that you get that enjoyment from it that that you wanted or you're having when you're going through that process. So I think you need somebody who can encourage and understand that and she's engaged with it. She loves the pieces we have as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'm also wondering, besides Asia Society, what other communities of art lovers or like institutions or organizations that you're affiliated or kind of are your point of contact for kind of engaging in an art community in Houston?
So not really many others. As I told you, because so many of my interactions are one-on-one, I don't have a lot of good luck staying engaged with organizations
Mm.
because a lot of it is they're specifying a style or thing like that, and so many of my things are, as I said, one-on-one, and it's just hard to stay involved with an organization for that reason.
Yeah, yeah, totally understand. Um, and if that's okay, we can kind of engage into the more kind of Asian art conversations. Like,
Sure.
yeah, like how does art kind of inform you or kind of reflect your Asian identity in part of it?
Oh, for sure. So I think that I mentioned that the first time I thought I enjoyed art to the point where I'd want to purchase it was Vietnamese art.
Mm.
And that was I'm Vietnamese, so there's a good connection there. But initially it was about pride, right? So, um, growing up and being Vietnamese, there's lots of things to be proud of, but you don't necessarily know that um, your your culture has magnificently succeeded in one thing or another. Um, and Vietnamese art was sort of that first thing where you go, oh, my culture produced this beautiful thing, right? And so that was a really good thing. And I mean, those artists at the time were starting to spread their wings and be shown in Hong Kong and Singapore and Japan and um, uh, even Europe and things like that. And so it was really gratifying as a Vietnamese person to see that we were international and our stuff was world class, right? Because there aren't any like Vietnamese car companies, right? And there's not like a Fortune 100 business guy. There's no like SpaceX based in Vietnam, right? And so it was the first indication that um, my heritage had produced something world class. That for like that was apparent to me.
And can you share with us like one of your favorite artists, or more specifically, a Vietnamese artist that you really, um, yeah, interacted with?
Yeah. So in that era, there were a series of artists that were getting commercially well known. So like Hoang Viet Sum is one. But around that time, I also met a Vietnamese American artist named Phi Phi Oanh, Phioanh, and she's done some amazing things with Vietnamese art. And when I say Vietnamese art, what I mean is that I'll give you an example. She looked at the history of lacquer, for example, and then she started producing just beautiful, modern, contemporary pieces using lacquer techniques. She did a showing. She showed her work here in Houston at one point, but she lived in Vietnam for a while, lived in Spain for a while. But I point to her as somebody who's particularly inspiring. Her work is amazing. And then uh, there's a friend of mine who's based in Vietnam, whose name I suddenly forgot. But I'll get that to you. Oh my gosh, can't remember, believe I forgot it. Anyway, he does an amazing work, but he does installation pieces, right? So the whole building. So he's shown in Houston a couple times. Actually, was that UH or Rice? I think he showed at UH one time, and his piece has also been in the Museum Fine Arts Houston.
Yeah.
He's
His first name started with Ding,
Din
Dinh.
Din Lei, yeah, yes, yeah,
Yeah, he
Din
did show at Rice Gallery.
Rice, yeah. So he's a friend of mine. Uh, Friend acquaintance is more accurate. We met at actually through Asia Society, through a conference there. But he does amazing work, and his woven photographs are particularly like stunning and for me inspirational because a lot of those woven pieces are about Vietnamese culture and the interaction of that culture and the Vietnam War, and it's just got a lot more meaning as a Vietnamese person.
Yeah, that's tremendous. Um, and I'm also wondering with the Vietnamese artists, what do you see that is unique um, in terms of how they encounter their experiences as first and second generations?
I don't know if I could paint a broad paint stroke across all Vietnamese artists. As I talked about Din and Fifi, I think I can talk about what theirs were, right, to me. But I don't know if it's possible to do a broad stroke and say all Vietnamese artists, or even most, are one way or another, right? As I said, I'm not entrenched enough in a movement or society to be able to tell you something smart about it. I'm more like kind of one-on-one with these things.
Yeah, I really appreciate your modesty, but I really want to say thank you so much for your contribution as a collector and a philanthropist in the Asian art scene. Yeah, I guess that's all of my questions. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, I think what you guys are doing are great. Houston has had for many years a fantastic art scene that uh, I don't know if many Houstonians know about it, but for sure the national art community knows that Houston's a pretty strong player in the scene. I mean, I can't tell you how many places I go to where I go into a really good gallery that's known nationwide or even internationally, and they know Houston, people from Houston are really buying the art, so they'll identify, oh, people from New York or LA and Houston, right? But they're not identifying like Dallas or San Francisco or things like that. So Houston's got a pretty strong collector community. So I'm hoping that these kinds of things can help grow it.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally want to thank our collectors for bringing those art to Houston and building actually like the collection as philanthropists for Houston as well to show them to the public, which is a great contribution as well. Although I know that you've been identifying that as selfish, but that to me, that's totally, yeah, admirable. Thank you.
Yeah.